Thank you all for joining me today. My name is DeAnna Batdorf, and I run and founded a place called the DeAnna Center. It's a community based on health practices and health tools that are from the earth, the elements, and looking at that in a global perspective, and a place for really all people to be able to heal, learn, and grow. Because the one thing we have all in common is we are all humans with a human body, and we all have the same way that our body works, and we have the same symptoms. And that makes us experience and feel things in the same ways. And it's just something that really is, if you ask me, one of the most precious things about looking at medicine based on the elements is that, really, and just body function, and we can figure out what our map and our body function means. It just gives us all these beautiful, ways to look at medicine, even from around the world. And what is it really telling us, and what pieces does it hold? So I open up with a very global perspective because I'm about human body ticking, and that doesn't change no matter where you go. And we have a right to know how our body works. And Ayurveda did an incredible job at seeing how the body works and explaining the organs and the channels and the tissues and our chakras and our emotional body, and how our emotional and our physical are a whole body. And then we have our soul, our knowing, our core beliefs, our wisdom, and who we are innately as an individual, as a human being. And so I love how Ayurveda is able to just really put this into practice and proved along the way through research. It really proved its worth, and it proved that, the liver puts this, symptom out, and the kidneys will exhibit like this, and you'll see it in the face, and you'll see it in the tongue, and you can read it on the pulse, and you can even hear it in someone's voice, or you can see it in their hair or the lines, or even where they hold weight or don't hold weight or have a rash. So we really are just walking maps of our life experiences. And we can break those down into the elemental foundations, which is what really makes Ayurveda, again, shine. They did a good job in understanding the body, but they explained the body. We have outer terrain, our environment, where ether and air and fire and water and earth reside. And nobody's denying the elements. This is one of the coolest things. No one's denying the elements. You look at science, you look at chemistry, you look at all traditional medicines from around the world. We were looking at ether, air, fire, water, earth. So we have five elements that feed and really kind of migrate and cultivate our seasons, our 4 seasons. And our 4 seasons are winter, spring, summer, fall. Or we could say right now, we just started fall, and then we're going to be in winter, spring, summer. And we're in this cycle, just as we always say, ether, air, fire, water, earth, in that order. We also say, that there's like a certain continuum of each one of those seasons. And something we'll really focus on tonight that I'm prepping us for, and I'm kind of getting there, is really where most people start with Ayurveda. Whenever somebody talks about Ayurveda, if you know anything about it, there's these 3 words, which are the doshas, and they're called Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. And I'm going to really want to explain, what does that word mean? What was the primary premise of that word? And how do we go from 5 elements to 4 seasons to 3 doshas? And doshas in Ayurveda are characteristics, or what they call our humors. So they're qualities that make us who we are, and that we just exhibit who we are. And we land in these 3 categories. So something we don't want to set up tonight, or something I as a teacher don't want to set up tonight, I don't want anyone to get stuck in a box. Okay, there is no you are Vata, you are Pitta, you are Kapha. No violent communication here. And by the way, in the Vedas, people translated the word perfect, but the word perfect was never really a designed word in the Vedas, because nobody believes that perfect exists. It's an ebb and flow of balance and imbalance. And when you're imbalanced, we have to learn to really recognize what that means and how to read it and how to kind of, figure out what to do, which is what I'll do tonight. But we have to be able to read our imbalances to be able to get ourselves back to balance. So I could finish this class right here, but I won't. But I could finish this class right here by just being like, look, if you're hot, you need cold. If you're cold, you need hot. If you're dry, you need nourish. And if you're clogged up and too congested and what we call damp or wet, you need cleanse. So it's really the art of how much hot and cold do you need, or how hot and cold are you feeling symptomatically? That can be emotional or physical. And then how much nourishment or cleansing does your body need? We can't build, you can't clean a pan while you're filling a pan to cook something, right? You're gonna have to either clean the pan and get it ready so you can go and build and cook something and fill it with water, clean water. So we're always looking at how much building, how much cleansing. Like right now we're in fall. This is naturally cleansing time, just like the leaves are falling off the trees. We are falling back and we are sloughing off and we are cleansing, and the leaves go to the ground with gravity. So it's cleansing intestines and cleansing lungs. And that's what even allows us to get to hibernation winter when we're more cold. We want to make sure there's not a lot of stuff in there, and then we get cold and it just kind of gets stuck. So we have to kind of clear everything out now so we can have really open channels for our lymph, our immunity. And that's what we need when we go cold. So this is just me really explaining how we are combinations. So there's no stuck little, box to go in here. You might have to sometimes be like, whoa, DeAnna, you're so Pitta, like how are you going to choose to chill out? What you going to eat, how you going to breathe, and what are you going to think different? So make some decisions, chill out, DeAnna. And that's me just kind of being like, whoa, I'm hot. So what do I want to do? I want to do the opposite. But we ebb and flow as we go through life. And we do have our constitution. So there's something in Ayurveda called our Prakruti and our Vikruti. Okay, our Prakruti is the word of mother, it's the word of feminine, it's the word of the womb, and it's our birth. Okay, not just that is involved, but that's, really the truth of that word. And I like to explain what words are if I'm going to use Sanskrit. And it's really that idea of your birth constitution. Like I am very Pitta Kapha, and you can kind of see what that looks like later when we start talking more about each one of those doshas. So I have Pitta and Kapha. If I say Pitta first, it actually means it's my biggest weakness. It's my dominant. But it also means I can turn it around into my biggest strength. And I can get a lot done with that fire, And then Kapha is my secondary issues and things I need to look out for. And then, how do I turn those around into service and gratitude and heart relation, which is such a big part of Kapha. So we all have our combination. And by the way, we're made up of these words we're going to really dive into, Vata, Pitta, Kapha. We're made up of all three. Like everybody, here, when I'm in a big room, I'm always like, everybody raise their hand if you've got one lung. Okay, you got some Vata. Everybody raise their hand. Do you have a spleen or a liver? Okay, got a stomach? Yep, you got Pitta. And then, hey, everybody got a kidney, at least one, but usually we got two. And it's like, you've got Kapha. So we really are made up of all three. And then we have innate imbalances to just guide and respect. And this is where I like taking the shame out and the failure out for people. My thing is really like empowerment, and we ebb and flow and we get imbalanced and we make crazy choices, and then we have to back up and kind of make some good choices. It's just life. If you really look at everybody, we're just living this life, all having good and bad times, easy and flowing and challenges. So we're going to be just where we are in the moment. So it always gives you the room to be like, I'm Pitta, but boy, am I dehydrated at the end of this summer with this much stress. So I'm way more dry than I know myself as a Pitta Kapha. So that means right now, I want to treat myself like I'm a Vata. So I want to make sure that I really nourish and think about hydration and change that dry. So you get to play. It's just this really beautiful play on where you're at and what do you want to do in the opposite terms. And that's probably some of my favorite things about Ayurveda as I open this up, you know? And, you know, usually I start this class, and it's funny, I just jumped right in. So I always follow wherever I'm at and at least finish. So I've got a good opener for the doshas and Ayurveda now. But I normally start this class talking about kind of how I got to this passionate place with this medicine from India. Okay. And the other thing I usually talk about is, you know, I needed permission from my teachers. I really wanted permission from my teachers. Like, am I the right person to pass this on? You know, do I have permission? Am I explaining this properly? And I've done a lot of checking in, and I've now been doing this for 29 years of my life. So I'm on 29 years of studying Ayurveda, and actively just anything that doesn't make sense, I end up just researching it and playing with it and looking at it until all of a sudden I'm like, ah, there, yep, this one fits in too. And they just made a beautiful science. And so it's kept me engaged. And another thing is I really wouldn't be doing this for this long if it wasn't helping people, and if people weren't inspired, and it wasn't like really, you know, keeping me healthy as the years go by. So it's proven itself like that too. But my early story, and I'm not going to back up and tell the whole story. It doesn't even, you know, I only do things that are authentic, but I will just touch on where my passion comes from after all these years. And really it was in the 80s when HIV and AIDS was a really big topic. And there was a lot of fear and a lot of misunderstandings and not knowing. And it was also really one of the first, you know, big autoimmune disorders that was being discussed. And the one that was being discussed was actually taking people's lives, even though there's a lot of other autoimmune disorders which do not, you know? And so it just put a lot of fear into people around their immunity in this auto mode, and like you can't control your immune system. And people were scared and they didn't want to face what was going on. And I just kind of felt like these people need care. You know, they're dying alone and they're dying without touch. And so I just was like, I'm going to figure out what this immune system is. And by the way, it has two names. The other name is the lymphatic system, which is Rasa, the river of life in Ayurveda. So the lymphatic system is our primary river that meets our bloodstream. Kind of beautiful when you think of the elements, you know, the lymph river meets the bloodstream. And I really just started like learning all about this immune system and how it was a one-way valve right here. And it had to, you know, feet to heart, hands to heart, and it had to be flowing at the chest. And it was a big part of why people were getting pneumonia. And I just thought, these people need touch. They need love. They need care. And I just got very invested and involved. And when I was 18 and a half, because I did this in high school, when I was 18 and a half, somebody I was caring for who was also teaching me hair and makeup and hair color, because I was in cosmetology school, he passed away and I was with him. And he just left me this tiny little note that said, please choose health, not beauty. And I had wanted to be a surgeon when I was very young, and I just decided, oh, this isn't for me. I spent time in hospitals. I was like, it's not for me. And I just decided to, you know, pursue beauty. And he really shifted things for me by the time I was 19. And so that's where all of my energy is coming from today, you know, is just really this richness of like being able to care for people and have a tool. You know, Ayurveda has given me this precious elemental tool where I get to share it with people and explain what's going on for them and empower them to do something and to take action, you know? And really that's what our world and changing in good ways is about. It's about rightful actions. And so that's really just a little bit about where I come from. And I really did choose health, not beauty, and started looking at like what really is beauty. And I met this beautiful Tibetan monk, Dr. Lobsang Rabgai, and he started teaching me Ayurveda. and Tibetan theories of medicine. And it was very powerful for me. And it just became my life. So that's a little bit about where I come from as I back up. And now we're going to get into just really the primary nuts and bolts of this science. This is a beautiful medical science. And it's just, was represented in a different way than we know medical sciences in this world. And so that's really how I'm going to go about this. I'm going to explain how it breaks down into the human body, and I'll make sure I give remedies along the way, because I feel like it's really important to be able to hear what something, like I could just explain it to you and then be like, you figure it out from here, that's it. But if you can go and try some things and actually give yourself like a 10-day challenge at the end of this class, really think about that. Like, can you, be like, okay, she mentioned this and this and this, and I'm going to do those 3 things for the next 10 days. And then you get to prove it to yourself on whether you're really reading it and what it can do for you. So I'll give remedies as I go too. Okay, so we're going to go back to the elements for one moment. And we're just going to really get to these doshas, because the doshas are like a little ways down in the line of Ayurveda philosophy. It's where things land, and the doshas are really about like an imbalance that is. So we'll get to those imbalances when we're stuck somewhere. And we'll start talking about what does the stuck look like, and what do we want to do about it. But we're going to start with the elements, and we're going to look at ether, air, fire, water, earth. I'm going to take you on a really simple story journey with it. And the first thing is we have ether. Ether is empty space. It's considered stillness, and it's just empty, and it's nothingness, and anything is possible with space. So ether is about what is possible with this space that we think of as like a, nothingness. And that's the ethers. Like, think about the ethers right now. I can't even grab it, right? I'm trying, but like, I can't grab ether, it's emptiness. So it's very translucent. Now, ether and air always work together very closely, and air is our next element. And they work so close together that you only have empty space until something moves, right? So a room is completely still, you open the door, you've got air. Air is the word of motion, okay? And in that motion, something is happening in the ether. So now ether is not standalone in its element. Now you have ether with motion in the space. And you have ether and air. Later in this class, we'll call that Vata, which is ether and air working together. You have empty space until something happens in it. That is the idea of Vata, constant change, constant change. Anything's possible, okay? And then that ether and that air, the motion is what allows fire to get stoked. I'm gonna knock on wood on my table right now because I'm in fire season, but everybody is, but here in Sonoma County, if you're not from here. So what do we do even right now to not stoke the fire? So I keep telling everybody, think, cool, calm, collect, keep going on about your business, pack, be smart, but go on about your business from there, because we don't want to get so like, that we start stoking it. So that's too much air and ether, too much motion. You're like, oh, what do I do with myself? And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, you stoked your fire. But we do need air to stoke a fire. Think about if you're going to make a, campfire. You're going to need to make some space in there, and then you're going to need motion to move through it. And that's how we enkindle a fire. So see how these are all feeding each other. So some people have a hard time figuring out how fire feeds water. First off, without fire, water is going to go to 2 fixed spaces. Without fire, you got ice, inert. And you're back to ether, stillness, okay? Too much fire, you're gonna boil water, and it's gonna evaporate, and you're gonna end up at dry. and you're going to go back to Vata again. So if fire's not balanced, we end up cold or we end up too dry. And I think it's a very important thing that needs to be discussed with Pitta that doesn't usually get discussed. We talk about it being inflamed and fiery, and we understand fire can burn and fire rises, you know, but we don't always consider what does that fire do in the end, or if you didn't have enough, what happens? And that's how it meets water. So that water either evaporates and goes dry, or that water then, you know, goes inert and becomes ice. With just the right amount of fire, ether, air, and fire, you're just going to maintain heat and insulation and liquid flow of water. So healthy fire is the liquid flow of water. And I'm doing this because that's how the wave goes in and the wave goes out. And the wave comes in and the wave goes out. How does that wave keep that consistency all these thousands and thousands of years? Maybe big, maybe small, but it's still coming in and going out. So that's fire. That's the gravity and motion and action oriented Pitta. Pitta means focus. It's the idea of focus. And that wave is focused, is it not? You know, it's constant in that way. Okay, so now we've got ether, air, fire, and water. And now we have earth. Now water is moving and making grooves and lakes and ponds and oceans and streams, and it's the way it moves, the fire behind it. But that water would have no structure and it would have no pathway without earth. So earth is basically the structure and the perimeters to allow water to get from one place to another. In the body, that would be a blood vessel with blood running through it, or your intestines with food and stool and breakdown happening in it, you know, because we liquefy our food to turn it into nutrients that we can digest. And so that is that whole idea, you know, of our water and earth working together. In our body, we're going to call it the waterworks. And we're going to be looking at each organ of air and ether, Vata. And what are the organs of fire and water, Pitta? And we're also going to be looking at Kapha. What are the organs and the functions of Kapha in the body, which is nourish and innate flow. It's juicy, you know? So here we've got nourish, Kapha, focused Pitta, and change. Change is Vata. And those are the primary 3 doshas that come from the elements. And, you know, the seasons are what really run that energy. So we've got the ether, air, fire, water, earth, one's feeding another. That is then creating a motion of our polar opposites. So we end up with winter, cold, summer, hot, west, wet, and east, dry. Now think of that geographically. To the east is inland, it's drier. To the west is coastal, it's wetter. You go north, anywhere you go to any country, you go north, it's usually cooler. And when you go down south anywhere, it's going to be a little warmer. Okay, so that's how we end up in these innate cycles. But what happens is, what if you get too dehydrated and then you get too dehydrated in the summer and then you don't do a cleanse in the fall because, you know, 3 months can go by in any in a blink of an eye. You know, and you're like, what, wait a minute, you know, and then you try to cleanse in the winter when it's not natural. You're supposed to hibernate and stay warm and insulate. And then we start getting our innate stuck imbalances. And that's really where we come to the main topic of Vata, Pitta, Kapha. So I could tell you healthy things about you being a Vata person, or, you know, from birth, or a Pitta person or a Kapha person, and I'll make sure we do talk about positives. But Ayurveda talks more about negatives because it's trying to track symptoms or a skin condition to its issue, or a line or a wrinkle that's on a map of your organs, or your tongue that tells you all about what's going on in your gut. So Ayurveda is very like, let's look at what's not working and let's turn it around and you're going to be in better health. And so it's always looking at imbalances, not to take away the positives, but those are the things that have to change. And so that's their focus in this medicine, is the things that need to change. And that's when we get into these doshas or humors or like stuck characteristics. Oh, I'm too Vata, I'm too Pitta, I'm too Kapha, you know? And if somebody actually says, I think I'm all three, I'm totally messed up. Well, it might be a little more dynamic. There might be a little more dynamics to work with there. I'm not going to take that away from having all three, but it is possible that someone could have like congestion in their lungs, even from like ash and smoke, but that's not normal for them. But it's we're experiencing it, and maybe they're more pitta in their intestines and more dry in their kidneys. And so we really could even be all three and not be doomed. Because there's always a way to turn it around. And that's what I like about being able to track my symptoms. I'm like, wait a minute, something's not quite right. Wait a minute, that's hot. Hot is pitta. I need cooling, and that's a hot emotion. I need cooling for my emotion, or that's hot because I ate hot food yesterday. So I need to cool my gut down. So you're always able to say this hot, cold, wet, dry, and then what is the opposite in dynamics? And usually if I'm out to eat or something and I'm already like, who knows, I might even be hypoglycemic, or I waited too long, or I was working hard and then all of a sudden I'm like, what am I supposed to eat? I want you to go back to the basics of the elements more than the doshas, to be honest. And just say, am I hot or am I cold? Yes, you could be both, but which one's dominant right now? And if you even are like, I don't know, like, is it hot outside? Pick that one. You know what I mean? Is it cold outside? Pick that one. So you have your seasons to count on, but you've got like, can you answer? And then ask, am I dry or am I wet? And that's the next big question would be, am I too dry or am I too wet? And wet is the word of damp or congestion, something stuck that's of a wet form. It's not like flowing wet. It's more looking at it as an imbalance. And so that's going to be the primary way you use Ayurveda. And it's really what's called the Pancha Maha Bhutas. And what that is, Pancha, like Pancha Karma, but Pancha is 5. Okay? And then you have the Maha, meaning great. And then you have Bhutas, elements, the 5 great elements. Pancha Maha Bhutas. And then that feeds our seasons. And then you can start using that as a weather report, which is how I like to talk about it, right? It's like, check in on your weather report. Are you hot, cold, wet, dry? What's your combo? And do the opposite. And you'd be amazed at how much that's going to allow you to even just start staying in the daily weather report of using Ayurveda and the 5 great elements. Okay? That's for relatively healthy. If you're relatively healthy, you could so use that. I mean, I worked on some things that were doshic for quite a few years when I learned about this. And then as I got healthier, because I've actually gotten healthier as I've gotten older, not more unhealthy. And I'm down to like, let me just do this on a daily. And it's gotten me really far, But I started with too much, like I was saying earlier, Pitta Kapha, and too much imbalance. And I'd lost a lot of my Pitta. I'm using myself as an example. And I got too Kapha. And I started eating my emotions and getting too much water, earth makes mud. And I started getting just too muddy and too kind of heavy. And I started just having all kinds of immune issues. And once I started really shifting that, though it's been a life process, once I started really, really getting that in better condition, that's when I started saying, whoa, seasonal health is really my healthy health, my maintenance. And then now, let's just really dive into each dosha individually, okay? A lot of times they're just talked about as little boxes, and then you feel stuck in one of those. But really, I like the way, we're making this nice opener of like, let's talk about them all and what do they do and provide. And then we're going to go into symptoms here. So first one up is Vata. We always talk about Vata first. Poor Kaphas always last. They don't seem to mind. They run more on a graceful pace anyway, but we always talk about Vata, Pitta, Kapha because it's ether and air is the first of those elements. And that is what Vata represents. There's a mantra for each dosha. The mantra of Vata is the leaf never lands in the same place twice. So it's the concept of constant change and just being able to go with the flow, be flexible, adaptable. They're like little hummingbirds and they're seed sowers and they're networkers out in the world. They're like, did you hear blah, blah, blah? Did you blah, 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 blah? Da, 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 da. They know all kinds of people in all kinds of communities. They float in and out of anywhere they want to go. They're very easy floating people. I make jokes around, you're at the party, where's the Vata? You're gonna have to find them. You're gonna be chasing them around looking for them. Pitta's gonna be all, hey, you just walked in the door and they're like, hey, get over here, give me a hug. They're radiant, Kapha, you're like, let me check the living room, let me check the kitchen. They're bound to be, sitting in deep conversation somewhere. Those are the variations. So Vata is this just like really airy energy. So they're of the spiritual body and they're of the psychic and multi-realms. So, if a Vata friend, if I'm going to walk with a Vata friend and they tell me that the rock just talked to them, I want to know what it said. They're not joking, they hear things and they hear other realms, and it's really where they shine. And they don't always tick exactly like all the go-getters in the world, and they're not go-getters. They're not of fire, they're of kind of what am I called to next? And I'm going where I'm called. So they're flowy. And it makes them just amazing networkers if you're going to think about a business plan. And if you don't flow good, and if you don't let things go and ebb and just shift, might be a good partner for you, but you have to let them help you to shift more, right? Otherwise you're going to be like, you're always shifting. And then it's like, you're not getting the point, So just keep that in mind because we're in relationship with each one of these, not just with ourselves. And Vata has 4 primary organs that rules its function. And since it's made of ether and air, it's all about gaseous exchange. And it's all about expanding and contracting and peristalsis. So peristalsis, expanding, contracting, it's just constantly moving. So here's your 4 organs that have that picture. Small intestine, large intestine, lungs, and heart. Pumping, expanding, contracting, peristalsis. And that is you working your oxygen and your hydrogen and your carbon, and all your chemicals are being utilized and being used and reforming from this expanding, contracting action. And that's a really beautiful thing that Vata does in our body. And they're also, at least 2 of the organs, small intestine and colons, large intestine, those 2 are considered the epicenter of health. Just as ether is first and nothing happens without it, Vata, they consider Vata organs to be the most important organs to target in keeping them clean. So cleaning your pot, it's all about those intestines. And a lot of those things are a little further away for us in perhaps this culture, and maybe this is not you at all, but doing enemas, thinking about healthy purgation. I'm not talking about living on laxatives, healthy purgation, or using magnesium for a purge. So you're using a mineral, or using seaweed tea because it has so many minerals and electrolytes and it'll cause a sloughing. but it's the use of enemas. And in Ayurveda, they say an enema a week is what, keeps the doctor away. Now I tell people, I think an enema a month is a really, really good start. And the first couple are going to be awkward. So you just got to let yourself be awkward. And it feels, I'm sorry, but it feels very relieving. I always say, why are we not talking about how having bowel movements actually kind of feel good? They feel good. You're letting out things that you don't need in your body any longer. And that's all about the gaseous exchanges of Vata. Whatever didn't break down, plaques up. And we get a plaque layer in our intestines, and we got to be willing to nourish, because this all goes very dry. And that's why Vata gets constipation as their primary symptom. Okay. As they also, Vata's ether air, right? Wind hits your face over and over, you're bound to get chapped. So Vata runs dry and cold. They're the two most important qualities. They're called the gunas. They're the two most important gunas of the list of gunas of Vata that are really representing cold ether, and air is dry. And always figuring out, because sometimes Vata, they'll just be like, I'm just doing everything it says. And I'm like, well, let's figure out if you need more warming for cold, or do you need more nourishing for dry, or do you need both? Maybe you're cold and dry. But it's a very important question for somebody who thinks of themselves as Vata to play with that idea. So Vata needs warming and nourishing. That's kind of the bottom line of Vata in its needs, and it needs warming and nourishing for the intestines. Okay, I did bring my fabulous forever enema bucket here with me. I have stainless steel enema buckets. They come with an implant bulb. They also come with a douche wand for anyone who has a vaginal wall. So you can use this for enemas, for douching. It is our right to cleanse down and out and keep ourselves feeling like anything that is moved in our body as gravity gets moved out. So think of douching and enemas as follow through. And by the way, in Ayurveda, there is also penial douching, and it's just never talked about. You're just filling up the bladder and then flushing it out. And so I just want us to be able to have real conversations here about how do we keep our lower channels clean, so we are filling up our glasses and filling up our pots with, clean, hydrating water. Okay, I will be doing a webinar. I'm looking at probably December, but look for it. But I'm going to be doing a webinar on the pelvic floor, and just what all is going on in the pelvic floor. It's not based on any gender. It's for everybody. We all have a pelvic floor, and we're going to be really investigating what do we do there, and how do we feel empowered in our root chakra, So this is our idea of Vata: constipation, intestines, and sometimes when things go dry, they get really tight, and they certainly dry out. So cracking joints is a symptom of Vata. And ringing in the ear because your glass isn't full, you're going to be dry upper channels. They get receding gums. They get dry eyes. They get dry skin. They get dry in the ear, and then they ring. So just think about it. This needs to be a full glass. And then your gaseous exchange can work beautifully. And if you're not a full glass, then you're going to have upper channels. Your water's going to go down with gravity. And so Vata gets a lot of upper channels, joints, and intestinal issues. And if you can hear something cracking, we know there's not enough synovial fluid. There's not enough juice in there, because there's other joints or somebody else's joints aren't cracking. So we know that's a sign of wait a minute, bone to bone, something's not juicy. And that's really an important picture. It's funny when I work with somebody who's gotten really dehydrated, a few things. This is a Vata norm. This is something I find a lot, is somebody will come to me and they're depleted, and they may even look a little bit dehydrated, and you know, they're maybe, thin and are having a hard time gaining weight, which is actually an issue for some vatas. And I do work with people who are like, I can't get muscles, like I can't gain weight, something's going on. And that's a vata issue of depletion. So the more depleted the symptoms, or the more depleted they might even look energetically or in their skin, the more I'll say, nourish, let's talk about nourish. But they're kind of like, people are always like, nourish, what do you know, like that sounds so decadent. So I've had to learn to really explain nourishment, and like the fact that we need to assimilate water. We need to be able to absorb water. We don't want to become pots of plants that haven't been watered enough, and then all the water sitting on top of the soil, which is our cells. So the more you have frequent urination, if you drink your water really good and you just pee it right out, very important to consider that there's some level of dehydration going on. And that's kind of the beginning stages of vata dry. Low blood pressure is the beginning stages of vata cold. Okay, and I'm gonna maybe put that together before I move on to some things that are pitta. So I said beginning of dehydration and not being able to assimilate water with dry, but with cold, I said low blood pressure. So our water volume is our blood pressure. So think about when you have enough liquid in a jar and it pressurizes, or like think about even when the tide is high at the ocean, there's more pressure in the environment. When the tide is low, there's low pressure in the environment. So your blood is liquid and it runs on your kidney oceans and the amount of water volume you have. So healthy hydration, which is healthy vata, is all about healthy blood flow. And that'll be healthy blood pressure. Water is blood pressure. I don't think that's being talked about enough. And it makes so much sense when I just say it. So like, why are we not kind of being able to put that together? But it's a great way for me to help somebody get nourished when maybe the word like, you need nourishment. And they're kind of like, yeah, tell me something I don't know. Or, or I maybe know that there was vata for a long time. Maybe they weren't nourished when they were a child. Maybe they haven't known nourishment. Maybe they don't know how to ask or give themselves nourishment. So that's usually going to be the learning curve for vata. And part of nourishment is like they're constantly changing. So once in a while, I have to say to someone like, can you live somewhere for 1 year? I'll ask a vata, can you live somewhere for, they're like, what? I don't know if I can do that. And I'm like, that would be nourishing. Just how do you stay put a little? You don't have to give up your freedom. You don't have to give up your like going wherever you want in town, but can you stay in one house or one place for long enough to experience what it is to be grounded? And that's a hard word for vata. It's something they usually want, but it's really hard for them to attain grounded because it's based on water. So they need electrolytes, and they need essential fatty acids. Electrolytes help you absorb water. Electrolytes help you assimilate water, and essential fatty acids help you absorb water into your cells. I have a great little $5.99 ebook. If you're not on my list, it's actually, I think, a pop-up on the website right now, but it's called, what is it? Like, I think it's just literally a trine of hydration is what I kind of call it, because the other trine is probiotics for the wet of the intestines for vata. So you need electrolytes, EFAs, and probiotics. Those are the foundations of hydration. Might take, a few months of this to really notice it in your joints or your skin or your nails or your hair, because those are all areas where vata goes dry and cold. Hair, nails, bones, nerves are all vata. In fact, bones and nerves are vata tissues. So you have your 4 organs, small, large intestine, lung, heart, and you have 2 tissues that are constantly changing, representing vata, bones and nerves. So if you looked at those 4 organs and 2 tissues right now, and you just said, whoa, she's talking about me, I'm Vata. Hopefully you're laughing at yourself and not like getting all shame game and all that stuff we do. Hopefully you're just like, oh my gosh, I gotta do something. You know, those are the organs and the tissues you want to really, really secure. If you know your Vata from birth, you know, like you've seen a practitioner or something, those are the organs we target for long-term care. I'm always like, let's just make sure we got lecithin in there for your nerves. And let's just make sure, you know, we've got some good, you know, vitamin D3 and magnesium for your bones. And those are just some of the supplementals I might do to catch them up while they get hydrated. Okay, so now we move on to Pitta. Very different story. All 3 of these are going to be completely different parts of you. And then you can start considering, you know, which parts of this is more me than others. But Pitta is fire, and it's actually not just fire. Fire doesn't stand alone. Fire and water work together for Pitta. The best description I've been able to come up with is the fact that fire is how we assimilate our food, and our food turns to liquid water. So assimilation, absorption is the primary function of Pitta. Assimilation and absorption is the primary functions of Pitta. Pitta means focus. And not only does it mean focus, but it has a mantra also. And it is fire rises in the body just like in a house. So whenever you think of inflamed or blood boiling, as someone will say, you know, like, oh, my blood's boiling, or like that, oh, you know, all of those things are fiery, really fiery bases, you know? And so we know that if something can come through the skin and present as a rash or acne or, you know, a hive, all of those things are representing the fire that is rising in our body because it has nowhere else to go. So since all of these work together, I'm going to say one thing about Vata again, because if fire is rising, and then I'll go right into Pitta, and you don't want it to rise, you want to use Vata, ether, air, you want to down and out your intestines, and it makes sure that fire is not rising. So even when you take care of your Vata, you're dumping your Pitta toxins that didn't assimilate and absorb. You wouldn't have toxins in your body if they assimilated and absorbed. So it's Pitta's job to keep you sweating, you know, and digesting and moving things out. But the more you have that down and out, the more less inflammation you will have. When you have too much Pitta alone, though, everything's going to show an inflammation. So that's going to be diarrhea or yellow stool. And there's 2 more that are very Pitta. One is, and they're the ones we don't talk about, odor. You know, sometimes when you have one of those bowel movements and you're like, oh my gosh, what did I eat? What is going on? I mean, we all do this, so I don't know why we're having a problem talking about it. You know what I mean? So that's when you're like, something is Pitta. It didn't assimilate. It didn't absorb. You know, you could have had not enough fire and it sat too long and putrefied, but often it happens with acidic food. And then we know that like you just made a big old mosh pit in there and it liquefied and got really just pressurized. And then we get diarrhea or we get a lot of odor. And the other one in stool that we don't talk a lot in Pitta is oily, so pasty stool. And people are like, oh, DeAnna. And I'm like, well, it's true. This is when you get skid marks in the toilet. You know, it's like water and oil doesn't mix well. So if you have too much oil in your stool that you didn't utilize, because we need fats, but you know, if your body's dumping excess, something didn't go right there, or you ate too many fats, and it is going to make pasty stool. So that means diarrhea, yellow, odorous, or pasty. These are all Pitta. You know, whereas Vata was constipated, compacted, and the one I didn't mention in Vata was rabbit pellet. So when things have been rolling around long enough where they've actually become like small pellets that are moving. That's more common with cold. Okay, so the other thing is Pitta is really all about, in symptomology, if something isn't moving through the bowels down and out, it's going to come out. So it's going to also be odor in other areas of the body, like mouth or armpits or down in the groin or feet. They might sweat. Odor comes from toxins. Somebody might be doing a lot of stress, fire sweating, inflammatory sweating, and there's no odor at all because they're not toxic, but it's a different kind of fire they're running. That's usually with adrenaline. Yeah, and they get a lot of skin conditions with their toxicity issues. And they also really suffer with allergies. So, you know, anytime I'm targeting allergies, I know that there's Pitta that is imbalanced, and then I have to figure out kind of where and what's, you know, what's behind it. Fire likes to move freely about the cabinet. You know, Pitta's like, you're not just going to be like, let me lock you in this closet for a little while. Just stay there. You know, they're going to be like, get me out. They're going to knock down the door. You know what I mean? And so, you know, Pittas definitely need, you know, open channels for them to be able to have their fire moving freely about the system. And again, they're just looking for what needs to be assimilated and what needs to be absorbed. And speaking of that, the 4 organs of Pitta are all assimilation absorption. Stomach, breaking down your food. Gallbladder, helping you break down your fats. Liver, 600 jobs like any focused Pitta. And blood formation. And spleen, which is your immune organ. So Pitta is in control of, and its function is to assimilate and absorb foreign invaders. Right? So sometimes somebody will have odor and they're toxic and they're showing signs of Pitta or getting acne. And then I have to really look at like what kind of foreign invader is foraging around, or what if they had one and it died off and now they have a whole bunch of die-off, which becomes very acidic. And the other thing with Pitta is they injure quickly because they have a lot of lactic acid that gets built up in their muscles. When I'm teaching in yoga classes, I always say, you know, it's the Pitta who wants you to leave them alone, but they're going to look over and see someone in downward dog and they're going to be like, if you can do it, I can do it. And so then they kind of like take themselves a little too far from their brain more than their body, and they injure quickly. So I'm like, the Pittas aren't necessarily going to want you to like engage them and tell them what to do. They're focused on that class, but they're definitely the ones where it's like, but you got to figure out how to make sure you watch their parameters, you know, because they get a lot of lactic acid trapped in their joints and in their muscles. And that's one of the tissues of Pitta. It's skin, which is all fat cells, and muscles. Those are the 2 tissues that make up Pitta. And that's why if you're holding toxins and you're not assimilating and absorbing them in your gut with your Pitta, they're going to get trapped in the muscle and in the skin layers. And this is why hives and acne and rashes and clogged pores, you know, all of these things are really looking at the fieriness of a situation. If it looks red, it is. You know, if it looks red, it's inflamed. Okay, and we're going to talk about a few more things that are Pitta, which is, you know, our immune inflammatory response. So let's talk about the spleen for a minute. I'm not going to try to explain the spleen, though it's a very fascinating organ, but I'm just going to explain it as far as this lymph river. Your spleen feeds out into your lymphatic system. And that is where every, your antibodies and your immunoglobulins, your B and T cells, your whole immune system, which is called the security system of the body, is looking for foreign invaders, and it's moving through these rivers and channels and moving these foreign invaders into your lymph nodes and are digesting them on contact. So sometimes you won't know you're working on something in your system. It'll just make you kind of like tired, or you just all of a sudden break a sweat. You're like, oh, why am I sweating all of a sudden? I don't know what happened, or you're just like, God, I am so tired, because your immune system is really smart. When it's working on something and it's having a hard time, it puts off immune responses, and it actually will kind of set you into a flare, hot flashy flare. It's, like a momentary fever. Now we know we are flaring when we end up with a fever, and then we know something's really wrong, which is also Pitta. But we have these tiny little ones because we're constantly around viruses. This is not a new phenomena. We've actually been around these viruses and bacterias and, microbes for a very long time. And it's our Pitta's job to tell us and give us a siren. Swells up the lymph. It's called the Warrior Lymph in your neck. It swells up the neck, tells you, and then it starts making water. It's like your fire engine comes with the hose, and you start getting congested. So we always know Pitta is going to have a hard time, and it's going to be in a flared immune state anytime you're working on something in your body. And then we have very similar responses when somebody has allergies, which reside in the liver. In fact, we make a hormone in the liver from eating protein. We make a hormone in the liver called histamine. And that histamine is what helps you to convert your proteins so they don't give you an allergic reaction, because we are actually allergic to protein molecules. So it's a protein molecule, even in dander or dust or, a pollen, it's the protein molecules that we're actually allergic to, and your liver has to convert those, and it's telling you it can't, and so it gives you weepy eyes or makes that inflammatory response. So it's easy for someone to be like, yeah, I have a red rash, I've got Pitta, or I have diarrhea, I have Pitta. But a lot of times we don't talk about like this dynamics, because we, again, don't totally know how the body works. I don't want to speak for all of you, but generally speaking, people just, they don't know they have an immune response, or that the body's having a hard time breaking a protein down when you have an allergen. And then that changes things, right? You can start tracking which proteins you eat, or which ones did you eat, and start figuring out like, okay, and you can also think about cleansing your liver. But I do want to tell you one thing, because it's cleansing time of year. If you're already like, ooh, cleansing time of year, let me get to it, liver. Well, the liver dumps to the intestines. So if your intestines are backed up and you dump your liver into your intestines, you're going to have a horrible detox. And detox should not be horrible. In fact, it actually can be quite effortless. But we try to do them quick, wham, bam, let's do this, 3 days. And we go to work. I don't know what's up with that, but, cleanse needs a little bit of like, calm down, let it happen. But if you are going to think about a liver cleanse, really think about clearing your intestines first. Another reason for your lovely forever enema bucket, and again, you could do a magnesium powder, and you could do it with a mineral. And you could just take it and just let yourself move your bowels until you, start noticing that there's just not excess coming out. A lot of people email when I put them on a purgative or a detox, and they're like, I've been pooping extra a lot for like 2 weeks. I feel good, but am I going to stop having this much come out of me? How much is in there? And I always have to say, well, it is the length of a football field. It just has a whole lot of peristalsis rings. So imagine how many little grooves, there could be caked on plaque, Think of yourself as a casserole pan. We have to soak the pan, and then we got to clean the pan. And so, you really, there can be a lot more bowel, stool, like fecal matter or plaque in there than we imagine. And you're not hurting yourself by getting that out of there. So I usually just have to encourage people to keep going. It will slow down. You will hit that, like, I'm not really moving anything anymore. And then you'll know you're complete, but usually within a month, it really shows itself. But imagine if you took the next month, because we're in cleansing time of the year. Imagine if you took the next month just to clear your intestines. Let me try an enema. Let me get some of this magnesium, let me get a, cleansing tea, you know what I mean? Let me start doing a cleansing salt scrub, like get a few things that are gonna really activate your lymph in your blood and clear your intestines. Then when you get to November, then you could really, say, hey, let me do a liver cleanse before we get into winter, because you don't want to be cleaning your fire organ in the middle of cold winter, So we need to work into our cleanses. We actually, in our Ayurveda, we cleanse for 3 months because it's a 3-month season. And then we build and hydrate all summer long. We cleanse in spring and we hibernate in winter and stay insulated. And so it's really 6 months out of the year, you're doing just maintenance cleansing. We want to remember our bodies know what to do. They actually are really smart and they're designed well and they know what to do, but your liver's going to have a much easier time. Let's say Pitta. Pitta's going to have a much easier time relinquishing control, which is a word of Pitta. It's going to have a much easier time relinquishing control if it's got a thorough way and if it's got, the freedom to get out. So intestines first. Yeah. And again, we're doing Vata, intestines, to clear the Pitta, inflammation. So we're using this ether, air, fire, water, earth. Everything has its right time. Just like they say, it's not what, can you or can't you eat. It's about who needs what and when do they need it. And I am starting Edible Ayurveda on October 2nd, Friday morning. So if you haven't seen those, the Ayurvedic Secrets of Food Alchemy, Mary Sheila and I just did. And then we have a whole series on Edible Ayurveda, which is taking you through, some of this, but really taking you into emotions in eating. And how does Ayurveda represent food? How does Ayurveda see a protein, a fat, a carb? Why electrolytes? Why EFAs? Who needs them? Which ones? How much? Everything is detailed down to like, who are you and what's your dose or which oil is good for you? And then we go in and do symptomology for every single organ. It is just really a brilliant course. Yeah. So please look that up. Okay, what else do I want to say about Pitta? I feel like talking about a couple remedies. So number one remedy in Ayurveda for Pitta is Kumari, AKA aloe vera. But they call it Kumari, Kumari, the great coolant. Okay, so this is aloe juice and this is inner fillet, or what they call aloin free. Like the aloe I have is the only organic aloe in all of the US. I get it out of Texas, but I wanted something from our land and I wanted it organic, and it's not easy to find. And I didn't want it diluted, but I was looking for that aloin free, and boy, is it a tasty aloe. But you can find it, you can find it in the store too. But you're going to take about a half a cup every morning, every night is the dosage for just like, I have Pitta and it's always there, and how do I manage it? It's a go-to. And very, very good for all things intestinal, stomach, and liver. So that's really great. If you do aloe leaf, it's a laxative. So you could add some leaf from your yard, or if you buy aloe gel, it's made from leaf, and you would have a laxative effect for this first month of cleaning the intestines. But if you really wanted to just cool the body down and get a beautiful, wet, nourishing bitter for cleansing, You want that inner fillet. Pulp only is the idea here. No leaf. So that's one of the number ones. The other one I have to mention that's so simple is going to be mint. There's two, there's mint and ginger. And you can think ginger is heating, but it's actually what's called febrifuge. So it finds heat and it pulls excess heat out. So it helps release heat by meeting it. So mint and ginger, which taste great together, but ginger is going to be the thing that activates the stomach and keeps your assimilation working. And mint leaves or mint tea or water, but please eat the mint too, because you're going to get it down in the stomach, but it's going to be your alkalizing agent, dispelling gases and breaking down toxins. So aloe and mint, and the other one would be cilantro. That's a very big one here for like detox. So the more toxic, the more odorous, or the more skin conditions where I know something isn't moving down and it's pushing out, then I'm going to be thinking, like I probably need that blood cleansing cilantro. And that could even be in a tincture, so it's a really strong form. But you could make a cilantro pesto, add some olive oil and lemon, and you could just smear that on everything you eat. The one thing I know about Pitta, probably because I am one, but the one thing I know for sure about Pitta is the idea of they need flavor. They need things to like be exciting. They're play related. So if I'm gonna like take away their chips and salsa, I'm gonna have to give them some tomatillo, cilantro, verde. I'm gonna need to figure out how to make flavor. Even when I asked Pitta about like, could you drink more water? They're like, I'm like, what if it had flavor? Would you drink if it had flavor? And they're like, oh yeah, I'd probably drink if it had flavor. But plain water for a Pitta, pretty boring. So they just don't want to do boring. I usually just have to, and I do a lot of the 10-day incentives with Pitta because they're like, that aloe doesn't taste good. And I'll be like, just take it for 10 days and see how it changes your skin and see how it changes your fire and your inflammation that you have. And it'll be worth that, half a cup of flavor, and you can also add a little mint to it or a little lime or a little lemon, and then you can, make it taste a little better. But usually Pitta, if they can prove something works after 10 days, they're down for the long haul. But I will tell you one thing, Pittas are focused and they're of the intellect. Remember, Vata was of the spiritual. Pitta is of the intellect. And they are a focus. So they are leader, get it done, A to Z, follow through, efficient, and unfortunately, they do not forget things. That's a good and a bad, right? So usually, I have to, help them to have just a little bit of proof in their medicine. If I can really show them, like, no, that really made you feel better, then they're like, I'm in. But if I tell a Pitta, you need to do this and you need to do that, they're kind of like, don't tell me what to do. That's just not how they tick. And I like to talk to people how they tick. You know what I mean? I like to talk to people in that way and consider that. Like, how's the languaging? Vata, I'm going to be grounded. I'm going to be fearless. I'm going to be juicy, because they're not. You know what I mean? Pitta, I'm going to be like, hey, let's talk about what works. Would you like to do that? Could you try that for 10 days? And use your humor. If you have a fiery person in your life, humor goes a long way in somebody who has a lot of fire, because you're helping kind of play with the fire a little bit instead of just head on. And then, they might really, fire rises, so they get sharp tongue. So you don't want to get their sharp tongue, or you don't want to become the sharp tongue. You want to make sure you kind of, get your humor played out. And I know for my own Pitta, that's a really great way for me to maneuver it when I'm starting to feel it, but I'm still in a situation. I kind of have to give a little chuckle, or like, oh my gosh, this situation is ridiculous. Are you kidding me? And then once I kind of play with it, then I'm definitely, I've pressure release valved my pressurized Pitta. And so remember that, Pitta gets under pressure. It's called Pitta hot. And then they also have fire rising, which is called Pitta sharp. And Pitta hot, pressure, that's the person who's fine until they blow. And then Pitta sharp is a little bit like, tell you how it is all day long. And they're just two very primary ways, again, called guna, qualities, but they're two primary ways that Pitta really presents. Even though there's a whole list of gunas that really represent it, those are the two primary ones. Yeah. Pittas, that leadership is a brilliant thing, but they have to learn how to, work in a team. They have to be willing to kind of have some team orientation, or like have somebody else's opinion come through. Otherwise it's just leadership, and then that's always a really tricky thing. And Pittas put themselves in those positions where they're in a lead, but they don't want to seem controlling, but they're in the lead. And so that's just a little something to have to be played with there. But imbalanced Pitta is going to be like my way or the highway. And then you have to be like, I don't know, that fire needs to calm down a little bit. There's more opinions than just the Pitta's way. Let's see how we doing on time. We're doing great. I am going to leave time for questions. So hopefully you're writing them down and you're seeing if there's any gaps I've left. But I will open up to questions after we do Kapha. So we'll talk about Kapha, and then we'll have a good 15, 20 minutes to just really dive in and even ask questions about who are you amongst this conversation. All right. So here we are in Kapha. And here I'm already coughing. It's hilarious. Let me represent Kapha with my Kapha. So Kapha is congestion. My cough's a little more dry right now, actually, because it's more about all the smoke outside. But still, I am known to be someone as a teacher. I have students who kind of will give me a cute little look whenever I cough in class, because I kind of cough. And when I'm with clients, I also, sometimes a cough will come on when I'm like moving something through somebody's body with my body work. And so I am kind of known in that way. And that's very common for a Kapha person because they're water and earth. And water and earth, the mantra for Kapha in this water earth is wet like tears. So they're deeply service oriented. They get a lot of gratitude juice and energy from taking care of someone, making sure somebody is happy and content. They are innately grounded, and they just want to be in service to the world, and they want to make sure everyone is happy. The flip side of that for Kapha, this wet like tears, would be they might get too emotionally invested. They might not have boundaries with that caretaker ability. So they might give and give and give and give. And then who's giving back to them? Like I can speak for myself in that one where it's like, I was doing body work because I'm 32, 33 years into doing body work. And I think I was probably 10 years in, and someone's like, when's the last time you had a massage? And I was like, ew. And I really started looking at that. And I was like, you know what? That's not fair. I should not be giving massage, especially deep therapeutic massage, without knowing, what it is to get one. And I just really started taking that more serious. And I think that's often, the Kapha can be a great practitioner, but the question always for them is, are they taking care of themselves? At least equally, right? They do get juiced up from their work, but are they taking care of themselves equally? Because the thing for Kapha is they'll look for water earth, and instead of it being like, I'm so fed and I'm flowing, they'll kind of give themselves away, and then they go home and they're exhausted and they're like, I deserve pizza, or I deserve ice cream. I worked really hard today. I deserve it. And so then they end up taking that water earth heavy they start taking that in as their emotion, as a way of filling themselves back up with juice. So water and earth is heavier than water and dirt. You know what I mean? You put dirt and water together, make mud, it's heavier in its texture. And that's just common for kapha. Now let's keep in mind, healthy kapha is juicy. Okay, so healthy kapha is like having nice, good tonification, but like they're juicy in their skin. They still look like a plum. When we dry out, we more look like a prune. But kapha has a real dewiness because they have more juice in them, and they are more thicker skin just innately. Now, one thing that happens with kapha, if I'm going to talk about bowels, one thing that happens for kapha a lot is they'll come in and they'll say they have diarrhea. And it took me years to figure out, why are so many kaphas saying diarrhea, but diarrhea is pitta? And I finally started kind of just saying, okay, wait a minute, how could this play out? Well, we could be calling this diarrhea, but it's really a learning curve of realizing that it might be that this kapha is moving a lot of mucus. And mucus is wet and it's damp. And so when it comes out, it's very slippery and wet and damp. And so it really can be a little more liquid. The difference with true pitta diarrhea would be there's odor, there's heat, it's maybe making your skin raw, it's maybe, projecting, there's more pressure behind it. Whereas kapha, it might just be kind of bulky and wet and not really well-formed stool. Okay. And they get a lot of congestion. Some kaphas will live with congestion for so long. I'll hear congestion. I'll notice they're congested. I'll even maybe see it through their skin and their sinuses that they're congested. But when I start talking about it, they're like, no, I'm not congested. And I'm like, okay, I believe you. I like to, I like to believe my clients. I'll say, I'm just not fully convinced. Can I ask a few more questions? I'll say, maybe you've had it so long, you're compacted and you're just used to it. Because muddy kind of gets just really used to things. So kapha kind of gets used to things and they just don't stir the pot. And so I have to usually kind of stir their pot a little. And so I'm like, how much do you blow your nose in the morning? How many times a day do you cough or have to spit? Do you have more wetness in your stool when you have a bowel movement? I usually have to ask and really help the kapha to kind of stir their pot. If I just say, do you have this? Do you have this? Do you have this? Do you have this? They're kind of like, no. And I'm like, why am I not buying it? I have to really, stir it for them. I have to be careful with Vata. I'll say, do you have this, 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 this? So they're like, yes, 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 yes. And then I'm like, wait a minute, not have you ever had it before? Do you have it chronically? So for Vata, I always have to be like, what's chronic? Because they're like truth tellers. They're like, I've had everything. I'll tell you the truth. You know what I mean? And, Pitta's more like, where are you going with these questions? What is this interrogation? And kapha, I just have to stir for answers. So what's their morning routine like? Because kapha's mud. So when they go to bed, they get very sedentary. So they usually have more morning symptoms. And then if they do get up and move and get moving, sometimes things will drain and clear. And then they just don't notice all day again until they have to blow their nose in the morning. And another issue for kapha is, since they fill themselves up after long days of caregiving, they often are late eaters. So they often eat late, or they get in a contentment pattern where they're like, I need that cookie, I need dessert, or I had dinner, but what's next? I need to fill myself up. And so they often, that's the first thing I do with kapha as a remedy, is I say, can you eat not after 7, or if that's crazy for your life, how about 8, and just what can, oh, you eat at 9. Okay. Could you eat at 8? Okay. Wait, could you eat at 7? But the earlier I can get them to not eat, and they do great with intermittent fasting, like don't eat after 6 or 7 and don't eat until 11 or 12 the next day. They do really good in that cycle, because if the kapha leaves their body empty, it'll start revving itself and finding that churning of those enzymes. Okay, so that's a little bit about bowels and a little bit about kapha. But I want to go into a few other things with their congestion, which is they also have a lot of immune and blood issues in poor circulation and poor lymphatic flow. So usually what I tell a kapha is like, hey, are you willing to look at yourself in the mirror? You know, I do it all the time. So I use myself as the example. And I'm like, I have to look in the mirror and I have to say, what are the areas that are just looking bulky or heavy to me? And what am I willing to do about it? Like, am I going to pick up a gua sha? You know, can I get a, salt scrub going? Can I pick up a carnelian gua sha because this is really activating? You know, what can I do to stir this pot and get this energy moving? And when they don't have a lot of moving, they get edema. So they get a lot of water weight. And water goes with gravity. So that water weight's going to be like in the ankles or down in the hands or trapped at the elbow or trapped at the knees. And some people get really trapped if they sit too much because, kapha has to exercise a little bit more to keep their metabolism moving. And if they sit too much, they're sitting right in that crux of our lower lymph in our groin. And so they'll end up getting more of their kind of stuck flow, and their edema will be more in their abdominal cavity. Yeah. Because they have low circulation, but they also have low metabolism. So this is the issue for kapha. Their metabolism's low. They get kind of low circulation, low immunity. And they really just have to have somebody who's like, I'm your cheerleader, let's motivate. So I feel like I'm a motivational speaker whenever I'm with a kapha. I'm like, you can do it. If I can do it, you can do it. And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, okay, let me get into it. Let me show her. Yeah. And I just really like to see their blood flowing, and they get color in their face, and they open up and start expressing themselves. And then everything just really starts kind of opening up for them. We don't feel very opened up when we're stuck in the mud. So the opposite of stuck in the mud is that stir the pot, open it up, clean it out. So the more muddy or congestion a kapha has, the more cleansing they need. So there is no spice off limits for the kapha. They get every spice they want to eat, from herbs in the garden fresh to, any global terrain they want to go to, because spices are used all over the world for enzymatic process and blood building. And what are the two things kapha doesn't have? They don't have good enzymatic metabolism, and they don't have good blood flow. So spices are the name of the game. And the nice thing for kapha is I can think, do they need more hot? And I can spice it up. I can add a little more bitter and cool it down. But I can pretty much, pick any spice. And I can even be like, give me a list of 3 you love. And they're like, well, I love marjoram. And I'm like, eat marjoram every day. Get it in a pot, so you don't have to go looking for it. Get a marjoram plant, eat that plant. And they're like, I like basil. I'm like, eat basil. But I usually make a list for them, like, what do you love? And I want to help them spice up their life, and just really starting to say, oh, I can do this. And isn't that true when we're congested, or really the word here that's the primary for kapha is depression? Isn't that really such a kind of why we just sit around and it feels kind of gunky and sticky and we just can't get out of bed? And finally we have to figure out a way to motivate. Something has to motivate us to get us to shift out. And that's really the thing. They're also big mouth breathers, so they get a lot of sleep apnea. which I've had great success helping people get off machines and deal with their breathing. They just have to keep training themselves to close their mouth. You know what I mean? And it's very true for Kaphas. They just mouth breathe with low blood pressure. And then it starts changing, and so they snore more, and they have that like losing their breath or skipping a little bit of a beat. And that's those ideas with sleep apnea. So I have to help them to kind of be open enough in their upper channels to breathe through their nose. So the first question there, if they have this issue with sleep apnea, how congested is your sinuses? Because you might be breathing through your mouth because you can't breathe through your nose. So then I can think about a neti pot, and I have this beautiful nasal rinse that I'm the formulator for, even though it's my friend Sue's company from Baraka who makes the neti pots. But I'm the formulator of that nasal rinse, and that nasal rinse in that neti just really starts clearing the channels. That's the other thing I do with the cleansing or cooling tea, which is this time of year. You just put a little tablespoon of this tea right in a boiling water, and then put a towel over your head and do a steam inhalation. And that way you're warming everything up and you're liquefying all of the mucus, and then you can blow your nose and get it out. And it's a big thing for Kapha to be able to clear the upper channels. And if they don't clear their upper channels, it slow drips. And where does it slow drip to? It slow drips down into the stomach. Little bit to the lungs and the bronchial tree, but it mostly drips down into our esophagus and down into our stomach. And then all that mucus puts the fire out. So that's why they end up with low metabolism from high amounts of congestion. Okay. So that would be another one that I think is very important to mention in there. A couple more remedies. I've mentioned it a few times, but the spices for Kapha, also salt scrubs, dry brushing, breathing exercises. Who doesn't need to exercise? But Kapha needs to figure out how they're going to do that. I always tell my story of how I started doing it. I put my shoes at my toilet. So when I went to go pee first thing in the morning, my tennis shoes were always there. And so now I'm in a habit. I put on my shoes and I get outside and I take my morning walk, and it's like changes my Kapha for the whole entire day. But that was so hard. Kaphas always are like, it's like, you need to exercise. And a Kapha's like, yeah, tell me something I don't know. Like, that's the problem. I can't seem to get to it. So I had to really just put it in my face there. Hey, it's morning time. Here's your tennis shoes. Get out the door. And so I've trained a lot of people, just being able to utilize that. And then once they're outside, I mean, it's so wonderful to take a walk. You just got to get those shoes on and step out. Then Kapha's like, oh my gosh, I love the world. They love everything. So if I can get them out into nature, they're just like, I'm in. But they get kind of stuck not going there, and then it changes, their physicality. Yeah. Okay, so before I open up to questions, I'm just going to tell you a beautiful thing about Vata, Pitta, Kapha that we haven't discussed. And it's kind of amazing we got this far without discussing it, because I love talking about emotions. And I really went physical in this class right now, and that's great. But I'm going to just take us to the emotional realms of Vata, Pitta, Kapha. And there's 5 key emotional words, key emotions that make up each one. Okay, so let's talk about the Vata 5 emotions. Anxiety, indecision, fear, guilt, and hyperactivity. So anxiety, indecision, fear, guilt, hyperactivity. So these are the things, when you have too much Vata in your body, these are the things that are going to drive you to these emotions. Or you're going to have one of these emotions and it's going to affect your physical body. One or the other. So sometimes we have physical symptoms and they come up emotionally. Sometimes they're emotional and they become physical. Pitta, 5 emotions of Pitta. Anger, resentment, judgment, trust, and envy. Anger, resentment, judgment, trust, and envy are the fiery 5 emotions that make up Pitta rising. And then we have our Kapha emotions, which are going to show in very, kind of wet or stuck ways, which is going to be depression, grief, greed, attachment, and melancholy. Depression, grief, greed, attachment, melancholy. And those are all the 5 main emotions that represent an emotion that caused that physical, or physical that is then going to represent as that emotion as a symptom. So sometimes our emotions are literal symptoms of how our body is trying to explain something. Like people are like, why do we have negative cravings? Why do we have, why don't we have positive cravings? Why do we only have negative cravings? And I say, well, my body tells me I'm fiery. I have to do the opposite and eat a salad. But when I'm fiery, usually I end up craving spicy food. So when I'm like, oh, I want something spicy tonight, sometimes I have to be all, where am I at with my fire? Because I might be feeling, my fire might be, you're spicy. Which means I don't need more spicy. If I'm already spicy, it's probably enough, So we do have to track that sometimes our cravings are actually our body speaking to us and telling us that we're experiencing something. And then you can figure out, is it hot, cold, wet, or dry? Okay, so I'm going to have you all unmute yourselves. And let's have a conversation about what makes sense, doesn't make sense, anything you really want to talk about here in this concept of Ayurveda. So whoever wants to go, let's go free flow.
I like it. Hi.
Anybody want to speak up?
Yeah.
Yeah, go for it.
Hi, my name is Lilia. So I'd like, it's hard to connect. Sometimes I see I have some of the Vata, some of the Pitta, and I'm stuck. So which one? And a little bit of Kapha. How to know?
Okay. Well, this is a great question. I have a couple layers for an answer. So the first part of this that I'm going to answer is like, you have some Vata and some Pitta, sometimes Kapha, but you mentioned Vata and Pitta. So it's really important that you remember that that means you have both. So you want to know that you have some Vata, and I would start figuring out, do you think it's more dry, more cold? Because that's going to let you know if you need more warming or more nourishing in your Vata. And then you have some Pitta, and it's going to be important to see if your Pitta is kind of doing more of that immune response and you need to calm your liver down, or is it more coming out of your skin where you need to cool your whole intestines down? And so a lot of times when I'm working with someone in a consult, and I'll definitely answer your question now, but I have to remember, if they're Vata Pitta, I know they need nourish for Vata, bottom line, and they need cooling for Pitta. So right there, anything you can think of that is nourishing and cooling is absolutely going to serve you. So the way you would look at that is like, well, something that's nourishing and cooling would be like a whole bunch of alkaline vegetables in a beautiful stew. The one thing I say for nourishment and Vata in general is like, eat out of a bowl. Your food should be so wet, it would roll off a plate.
Okay.
So you want to eat out of a bowl, you know, and you want to make sure that it's really alkaline in what's in the bowl. But if you put nourishing and cooling together, you would be handling your Vata Pitta.
Okay.
And then if you did have some Kapha, just saying, because you don't look that Kapha to me. So if you had some Kapha, because I don't want to take that away from you, it might just even be like, what did you eat the last couple of days? It might have been like, oh, I had too much dairy, or I had too much bread, or, you know, it might have been heavy, sticky food, which is muddy. So if the food was a little too muddy, you know, not nourishing, but just thick, then you might have just kind of slowed your metabolism down and you have Kapha just in the moment. You know, whenever you've eaten, if you get Kapha in the moment, it's as easy as like, let me eat salads for a couple days. And you could do soup and salad. And then you would kind of be like, oh, there's my handling all three. You know, alkaline soup, really wet, with a salad raw, which is awesome for Kapha. So there's always a compromise. And I like that in this medicine. You can always find a compromise. Or if somebody's like, I'm from Mexico, I love Mexican food. I'm like, well, don't stop eating the food of your people. But like, you know, how can you make it the best food possible? Could it be, you know, less oily, or leave out the cheese, or add more cilantro and lime? Yeah. You're still eating Mexican food, but you're eating it like, how's the best way I can possibly do it? So I like that Ayurveda isn't kind of like, no, stop doing it, you know, but they're more like KNOW, no to avoid. And then sometimes you're going to do it anyway, because it's called life, you know, and if you're relatively healthy, we have a little room for moderation anyway. You know, you do look more Vata Pitta or Pitta Vata off stature, you know, and I can look at someone's energy, I can look at their skin, I can look at their stature, you know, those things without a pulse, you know, which would tell us really the truth of your constitution. But we can see each other's constitution, because like our eyes don't change, they age, but the shape of our eyes or our lips or the texture of our hair, those are things that are with us, or our bone structure. Those are things that are with us like our whole life. And so they end up being how we read our actual birth constitution. So like Pitta is innately muscular, and they're very squared off, and they have very like sharp edges. Oh. You know, Vata is tiny bones, and they're a little more irregular in their structure.
I'm neither of them.
And then, you know, and then Kapha is a little bit bigger boned, more padding in their skin, and they're more like moon faced, like really round, you know what I mean? Or they have like really big eyes, or like really thick hair. And those are the things that show the luster of Kapha, or the petiteness of Pitta, or the directed muscular structure of Pitta. The petite is the Vata. So when I look at you, I think you're probably Pitta dominant, but you've gotten depleted, which gives you Vata symptoms. So that would still be back to cooling, hydrating as a primary idea for you.
Wow.
So we really are combos. You know, we really are combos. And then, you know, life is a combo. So, you know, kind of gives us the dynamics of what's going on outside, and then what's the combo of who you are. But I like that, because then it allows you to create like an individual program for yourself. But munchy crunchy food, it is too dry. So that would be your no to avoid. You know what I mean? And if those are nuts, well, those are pretty big acid profiles, and they irritate Pitta. So you could do seeds and seed oils, but you'd probably want to do no munchy crunchy, or like watch your munchy crunchy, and maybe watch how many nuts, which could be one of those munchy crunchies. And so I would target that. It'd be like, I can have seeds, and it'd be best if they were soaked.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? Or a butter, because then you made them more wet.
Seed butter, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So hopefully that answers the question and kind of helps with how do we actually take this in and use it as a dynamic being, you know, because we are so dynamic,
Yeah.
you know? Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Other questions out there? Happy to answer
Yeah.
them. Go
Oh,
for it.
I had a
I just
question.
want to
Oops, sorry.
say
Go ahead.
thank you. I actually have to go, so I'll let you ask your question, but I just wanted to say thank you for this, and I'm excited to be in conversation with you another time.
Thank you so much.
I
Yeah,
appreciate
check
it.
out all my classes going on and you'll just learn all kinds of things. My webinars are
Yeah.
really inexpensive. So
Okay, I will definitely look into them. The one that you were mentioning that starts about the pelvic floor sounds really
it's
interesting.
so good. Yeah.
So I will follow up. Really appreciate it. Have a great rest of your night. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Of course.
Debbie?
I have an aloe, a piece of an aloe in my refrigerator right now. When you were talking about using the pulp versus using the leaf,
Yeah.
how do I know the difference? Like,
Okay. It's funny, I almost answered that earlier, but I was like, as a teacher, you're always like, where do I stop in my knowledge? You know, where do I stop and start? But I started to tell you that. So I love you brought it back. So basically, when you, so you want to shear the pulp off the leaf, right? So there's that inner fillet pulp, and you just want to take a knife and shear it right off the leaf. And what's going to happen is it's going to cause these chemicals, anthraquinones, to turn yellow. So you know how when you like start slicing it, how it gets that yellow film everywhere? So that's the laxative chemicals.
Okay.
So if you want to remove that, you rinse the pulp underwater and you just pull all that yellow off of it. And you could either throw it away or you could keep it in and mulch it with your leaf. And you could have that yellow and that leaf and you could mulch it down and you could use it as a laxative itself.
Okay.
But if you don't want the laxative, you just want to clean all the yellow chemical reaction off of the pulp and then use the pulp. And what I like, because I grow a lot of aloe, I like to just take a little 1-inch chunk, 1 by 1 inch chunk of aloe, kind of all the way around. And that's what I juice with in the morning. I'll do like a cilantro, celery, cucumber, like a super alkaline green drink with a bunch of ginger in it or cinnamon. And then I'll just put that chunk of aloe in there. And then I just move it through the juicer. And if you don't have a juicer, just, you know, throw it in a blender, you know, and you just mulch it all together. And then you get all the fiber too. Because sometimes I want somebody to get more fiber. So I want them to blend it. And that's better for somebody who's constipated or more Vata. I want them to get the fiber of everything. Whereas Kapha, they don't want to have to break down all that fiber with low metabolism. So it's better that they kind of get the fiber out and do a real juicing. Yeah.
And if it were Pitta, like the oily, would you say to scrape it off of the green skin or keep the green skin?
It's oily. If this person doesn't mind having a little bit more bowel movements through the day, not like extreme, but if you had that little 1-inch chunk every day, which is about equivalent of, well, it'd be twice a day. If there was a little bit of that yellow chemical reaction or a little bit of leaf, it would help that pitta do that down and out and move the fire down and out. But they do need to be forewarned that, you know, they're going to have a little extra bowel movement through the day because they're going to be moving that fire out. So it is in their favor, but I'm going to have to usually prep the pitta to know that. Otherwise, they're like, you made me poop all day. I had meetings, you know, and I'm like, okay, let me keep that in mind. The pitta does not want to be slowed down and they're very busy. So I've had to like learn to be like, okay, do this on your day off. So I always tell pittas on your day off, and they're like, what day off? I'm all, well, let's actually talk about that. You know? What is it to have some time off, you know? Or put the phone down while you're eating, because pitta will do the extreme multitask. They're just blaring. You know, it's too much on the adrenals, and there's too much go, 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 go. And then they don't even know how to decompress at the end of the day. And aloe is a great decompressor. Like, that's a really good thing for a person who comes home from work, or you're at the end of your day, since so much of us work at home now. And like, how do you transition from work to home? Aloe and a neti pot to clear out the day. Do a neti pot, you know, and then eat that aloe. And like, I can usually get back to like, I'm DeAnna. Like, I'm me, you know, let me kind of, you know, put all this work stuff down for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because it's hard for Pitta to do that, but aloe helps a lot. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Other questions? Or if anybody wants me to see them and tell them what I think their doshas are like, even if somebody wants me to use them as an example, I'm happy to do it. Yeah? Okay. So you want to kind of, okay, let's see. So if I looked, if I look at your, because again, I can look at many things. I didn't do face and tongue here, but I will be doing face and tongue, and I teach it a lot. But when I look at skin and face and different things, I see a few different things. So first off, I see a certain amount of vata, but I'm going to be really honest. It's not like some, you know, it's like you look small boned, like there's a petiteness to you, and that is going to be vata, because air and ether is thin. And so we run more thin, like it's so thin, I can't grab it, you know? And so people, so there's a petiteness, but there's also an energy around you that feels like that very vata playful, you know what I mean? And it feels like you just have that sense of kind of like, yeah, I'll do anything, no problem, let's play, like, let's do it, try it out, you know, let's have a conversation, let's see where it lands. You know, you have that essence about you, which is a very vata essence. So we do look at like someone's, you know, what is their energy field like? And then what is their bone structure like? If we're really thinking about, you know, birth constitution versus where you're at now. So I see some vata, but I don't see all vata. I also see healthy pitta. So it's interesting you asked a pitta question, which I think might have been for yourself,
Yep.
not someone else.
Yep.
So that was interesting. Even when you asked it and you said oily, I thought to myself, what's going on in her gut? She doesn't look like a pitta oily. Like I am a pitta oily. You know what I mean? You just don't have that, you know, thing. So I'm just wondering, I'm going to maybe a little deeper into details now, but hopefully everybody's enjoying the conversation. But I'm wondering if you're having a hard time digesting oils and they're causing more pitta oily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Tells me maybe you don't have enough hydrochloric acid.
Mm-hmm.
Like you need to build a stomach fire.
Okay.
So that your stomach can break down fats for you. So if you just think you're pitta, you would be going cold, cold, cold. But I have a feeling that you have low stomach fire.
Okay.
And that your food might be putrefying and not breaking down before it really moves through your systems. Like, do you get bloated within an hour of eating?
You know, I haven't actually paid attention to that yet, but when we started talking about the different things for the pitta bowel movements, I noticed that, you know, the past week or so, my digestive tract had changed.
Yes. And a good way to get that moving without just building a big fire right now in your stomach, it would still be going back to that cilantro, mint, and aloe. So you're on to something, because those will turn the stomach, but they won't do it with like a whole bunch of heat. I might add some ginger in there. See what you could do to do a little bit of warming up in there as you're using like the mint to churn it. But I have a feeling you got to build your stomach fire. And then the other last little piece, and we'll see if anybody else wants to do this, but the other piece is I also see kapha in you. I just see very healthy kapha. Like you have a nurturing essence. You do have thick hair, and you do have a fullness to your face. Like, I just like to always make sure we're not just talking about like something we see that is a weakness, but I do see Kapha in you. It just looks like it's a strength.
Oh.
So that's something we didn't really talk about that much in this class, is like we want to target the weaknesses to change them, but like that means there's strength. Like if I'm a Pitta Kapha, that means my Vata like is pretty solid. You know, like I don't get a lot of Vata issues. And so that's actually one of my strengths. You know, even if I'm chasing my Pitta and Kapha around, like, you know, chasing my doshas around like anybody else. No matter how long you've been doing this, you're still living life. You know, we're humans, you know, with human behaviors that are happening. But yeah, so I just wanted to represent, like, I see a very healthy Kapha essence in you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Anyone else who would like to? Okay. Well, we're right here on time. And I'm just going to finish up with a couple of things. And the first thing I'm going to, finish up with is just what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a couple things sent out to you. I don't think there was a handout included in this, right? You were just coming in and listening. But I'm going to have a few things sent to you through Andrea, who gave you your Zoom link. And one of the things I'm going to do is I have these handy little handouts, one for Vata, Pitta, Kapha. And the first side of it, I just hand these out for free all the time. I mean, like they're just, why not everybody have this? So it goes through and tells you common symptoms of imbalance for each one, and you can kind of start tracking yourself. And then the other side is just remedies. What spices, what herbs, what foods, what might you want to know to avoid? And it just gives you like, okay, you found something going on. Well, you might as well know how you can take action and be empowered. And everything is very cost effective because I do, that's what I've been doing 28 years is running, by donation clinics for people in need, as well as a private practice. But I started my career on that, just always felt like if I was going to, do this, I wanted to make sure that everybody had access. And so I've really spent my entire career making sure people have access. These are the best accessible little things ever because they're just sitting around at the center. We give them to our students and they pass them out to all of their clients too. So I'll make sure you get these. And then the other thing I have is I have this questionnaire. And the questionnaire is broken down into cold, dry, hot, wet. And it goes over all your emotional symptoms and all of your physical symptoms. And then again, at the bottom, it gives you advice. Like, what can you do if you're cold or dry or hot or wet? And you total it up, so it shows you your combos, But I thought those would be really good for you to be able to like, okay, what's chronic? What symptoms are really been with me too long? Or I just can't figure them out. And then you can start seeing if they're on the list. And it just kind of helps you look at your weather report, and like, how is your weather? And what does it look like emotionally and physically? And what do you want to do? What do you want to do about it? So with that said, I'm going to see if I can get to something on my computer. I sure hope I don't lose you all because I'm super not a techer, but I think I can do it. And I'm just going to pull up something and I'm going to leave us with a tiny poem. And I'm actually sharing this like for the first time publicly. We just created like an anthem poem that was really, I have a class coming out in January, which I've been teaching for years, but it's a master course called Body Mapping. So I do my edible Ayurveda nutrition course, and then I have body mapping, which is just like, how do you track yourself? Like, you think this was cool? imagine what I can teach you in like 7 sacred weeks about your body and symptoms. And I teach the face map and the tongue map and how do you track your skin? How do you track moles? You know what I mean? Like everything is a sign. And so we just finished this beautiful poem, and it is really representing, let me see if I can do this. Yay, here it is. And I'm just going to read this to you all, if you don't mind. And it really is quite short. Okay. My body belongs to me. My body holds space for the physical and emotional of this human existence. In the ebb and flow of life, I will lose my balance, and I will find my balance. In this body, I have the right to alignment, a state of wellness that I can call home. I can be my own health detective. My symptoms speak to me. The elements, my guide. Ether, air, fire, water, earth. The seasons of time speak truth. I can change. The freedom of my health is in my hands. And with these hands, these tools, this breath, I am ready. I am my body. So hopefully that speaks to each one of us as we all share this human body and its functions and its symptoms and its characteristics. And we all get to find our own individualism through understanding who we are and how we tick as an individual as we work this beautiful, web of humans everywhere. And so the elements align us, and our human body and our human existence is what aligns us. So may we all be able to hold that in our head and our heart and speak really respectfully in between. And may we all be gentle with ourselves and gentle with our symptoms, because shame is not going to get us anywhere. So may we all be very respectful to these beautiful bodies that we each have. And may we have that be what allows us to respect everyone else in the body they have. So thank you so much for joining me.